Pope Francis died earlier this Easter Monday after leading the Roman Catholic Church for 12 years as the Bishop of Rome.
The Pope has left not just a vacancy, but a legacy that needs to be filled.
It's just very sad because now we have to get another Pope sworn in and chosen, but I think we will really miss him terribly.
It's quite a loss and big shoes to fill, actually.
There have been popes from Africa in the past, but certainly there could be a pope from Africa.
Whether the Pope is from the north or the south or the east or the west, the Church will welcome that Pope.
The next Pope should focus on embracing diversity within the Church. We need a greater representation of diverse voices.
There is immorality in the Church. So we need the Pope who will bring back faith, who will trash away the immorality.
I also advocate for an African Pope.
7 p.m. Sunday night. Happy Freedom Day, everybody. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to you, South Africa, and those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience with us tonight will pop up soon on your screen. They will weigh in terms of some of the burning questions they have for our guests in a short while. Habemus Papam, a Latin phrase that translates to "we have a pope." We will hear these words soon. Exactly when, we don't know as yet. Francis's death marked the beginning of a series of events which will eventually lead to the start of conclave, the election of a new successor. For now, the Church is still in a period of mourning, a period of sede vacante, or vacancy, S-E-E. Tonight, we want to pull back the curtain for you, so to speak, and take you to the heart of one of the most mysterious and secret events in the world. How has the new norms governing the apostolic succession of the See of Peter changed over the years? Has it changed? The Pope is regarded by many as Christ's vicar on earth. How does the divinity and the human element of an election marry when choosing the next Pope? We will find out. It leads us to the question of the week, and we're asking you, what priorities should help guide the next Pope's mission following the paths charted by Pope Francis? We want to hear your thoughts. At SABC News_TV, the College of Cardinals remains the body responsible for electing the Pope. Let's walk and talk. To the touchscreen we go. The magic wall. Will it provide any clarity for us when we talk about this process? What's going through the minds of the cardinal electors? We will discuss this, try again to pull back this curtain that we've been talking about into this event. Perspective coming up. All right, I want to tee this discussion up for you, what we know and why it matters. SABC News specialist researcher Janet Witten joins me in studio. Janet, good to have your better mind on this. Not many people understand the processes that often follows, so please shed some light. These are the last 5 popes. Now, many feel that a pope's ministry is ad vitam, meaning forever. But we know that's not always the case. Explain.
No, it's not always the case. It's been going on for a long time. Pope Francis, who we're talking about most of the time, is number 266. You mentioned St. Peter. He's regarded as the first pope. So this is a process that has been going on for a long time. And because of that, it's obviously changed over the years. But these last 5 popes are fairly significant. We have Pope John Paul VI, who took over from the very well-known Pope John the 23rd.
Right, very popular.
Very popular, and they're very significant in the fact that those two popes overlap the Second Vatican Council, which is essentially where the Catholic Church was modernized, and that kind of set the path for where the Catholic Church is now. John Paul I, 33 days he was in Rand and died of natural causes. It was just one of those unfortunate circumstances. He was the last Italian pope, interestingly enough. He was followed by John Paul II, the Polish pope, so to speak, who was beloved by many, and many will remember, who've been around long enough as you and I have, for an attempted assassination.
Back in 81.
Back in 81, which was a very serious attempt. I mean, he was very seriously injured in that, and there were a couple of other attempts on his life as well. Obviously in power, so to speak, for a very long time. He was followed by Pope Benedict. There's quite a distinct difference between these two papal reigns, because Benedict was far more conservative. Interestingly enough, Benedict was quite liberal, progressive in his youth, but became more conservative when he got older. Pope John Paul's reign also is significant in the fact that he was Polish, and he was the Pope during the move from communism and the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, and that played a very big part in how his reign continued. As I said, Benedict was a little bit more conservative, but perhaps will probably be remembered for the fact that he abdicated. The first pope since the 15th century, I think, to actually do that.
600 years.
Which is extraordinary. He actually died in 2022 at the age of 95. He abdicated because he felt he was not able to continue frail in both body and mind, as he put it. And then Pope Francis, who is a progressive pope, who's moved the church in a very progressive and some would say liberal direction. That has and that because of that he has supporters and a lot of detractors. Correct. A lot of people feel he's taken it a little bit too far.
Right. So I want to have a look at the global population of the Catholic Church, over 1.4 billion. But here's the interesting part here. Africa, this we're told is steadily increasing, is it not?
It is. The global Catholic population kind of goes up and down. It's fairly steady at the moment, but where there is increase is in Africa. There is a steady increase. A lot of Catholics in Africa are in the central part of Africa, East, Central and West Africa. By far the majority in the DRC. That's where the majority of Catholics in Africa are.
Over 50 million.
Over 50 million. It's a lot of people. Then Nigeria has a fairly substantial population. Tanzania has a substantial population. There are a small amount of Catholics in North Africa, but obviously that's dominated by Muslim countries. South Africa is a surprisingly small population. And of our population of around 60 million, only about 3 million are Catholics. So in terms of how much we count, we're fairly small.
I wonder if the fact that there's been this increase could sway some cardinals during conclave to consider this as one of the factors.
I think that has that definitely has an impact. I think that's the other continent where there's a slight increase in Catholicism is in Asia. This big part of Asia, the Catholic population is quite small, because of those 155 million, nearly half of those are in the Philippines. The Philippines is a very, very big Catholic population, and one of the contenders who we will talk about is from the Philippines.
Right. So, as we look to the next stages, and a very important one, that of conclave. Explain for those who might not be familiar with this.
This conclave is what is known, the election of the Pope is known as conclave, when the cardinals all go into the Sistine Chapel to vote. It will only start 9 days, at minimum of 9 days. The 9 days after the funeral are a mourning period. It'll begin with a solemn Eucharistic Mass with all of the cardinals will take part, and a few additional senior officials from the Vatican as well. The electors, and this is the important part of it, the electors, all the cardinals are not electors. There are 285 cardinals, only 135 of them are electors, because there's an age cut off after the age of 80. You can't be an elector. You can be elected Pope, but you can't actually elect.
Right, and we're told that those cardinals will still participate in meetings and build up to it.
There's a lot of meetings happening as we speak, because once they go into the Sistine Chapel, there's no discussions. Everything's fairly secretive, we know that, but there is no real discussions to happen. But there's a lot happening right now, and will be happening in the next week. All of the cardinals are obviously already in Rome. They were there for the funeral, and they will stay there until conclave takes place.
South Africa has two?
South Africa has two. Stephen Brislin, who is the Archbishop of Johannesburg, and then Cardinal Wilfred Napier, who is not an elector.
Correct.
Brislin is, but Napier is 81 years old, so he can't take part, but he is in Rome.
Now, in terms of the voting, do we need to reach a consensus here? Is there a threshold?
Yes, 75%, two-thirds.
Right.
Two-thirds is the threshold, so the voting will continue until there is a two-thirds vote for one single person. And that, interestingly enough, when you talk about John Paul II, that is actually what happened. He wasn't one of the initial favourites, but there were two Italian cardinals who were very close, and Pope John Paul II was actually the compromise candidate in that situation. And it can take days. It can take a long time.
And if I remember correctly, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio was also not part of the board of the favourites, right? We know how that turned out.
Exactly.
Then this is the most interesting part here.
The black smoke will emerge from the top of the Sistine Chapel. So once the first voting started, they have 4 rounds of voting a day until such time as there is a result, and the smoke will remain black. Once a decision is made, the black smoke comes from the burning of the ballots. A chemical will be added to turn the smoke white, and we will know that a new pope has been elected. And once that happened, and once he has taken an oath inside the Sistine Chapel and announced to the cardinals what his name will be, he will then be presented to the public.
And that will be on the balcony of St. Peter Basilica. Habemus Papam is the words that is normally used. We have a new pope. We shall see who that is. But this is the numbers in terms of dealing with the election of the Pope. As you mentioned, these are the electors of 135. Non-electors, this is the total in terms of 252. What's interesting of this, there's about, 108?
Correct.
I can't even draw an 8. There we go. Something like that. 108 were appointed by Francis.
And what's significant about that is that those aren't automatically supporters of Francis's type of progressive papal reign, because he was very careful. He named cardinals all over the world, so that becomes interesting, because there's cardinals that haven't spent a lot of time in the Vatican, which means some of those cardinals don't really know each other, and that is significant. But he was also very careful to appoint cardinals from across the various different opinions and spectrums of Catholic tradition and of progressive. So they're not all progressive. They aren't all necessarily going to vote for somebody who is like Francis was.
Right.
So that number of 108 is significant, but not as significant as it might possibly be. Here we have 18 African voters, including, as we mentioned, Stephen Breslin, the South African Archbishop of Johannesburg.
All right, Janet Witten, thank you very much indeed for your expertise. Jan Witten there is SABC News Specialist Researcher. We will discuss this in a short while. Let's get to that discussion right now. We've lined up a number of guests in the know in order to take this story forward and help us better understand what we're dealing with here. Bishop Thulani Mbuyisa joins me. Bishop, good to have you onto the program. We also have Catholic priest Father Smilo Mngadi, Communications Officer of Marion Hill. Father, good to have you also on the program. And Theologian Dr. Nonthando Hadebe is with us as well. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us. Our digital audience as well, please raise your virtual hand, get into the conversation, ask the questions, the burning questions. I'll do my very best to get your questions on air. Bishop, if I can start with you, the mystery surrounding conclave. That's what everybody's talking about. I guess it's feeds from the popular media, the films that have been out there. Everybody, it's so dramatic as it's portrayed. Is it like that in real life? Talk to us about what goes on during Sede Vacante, the vacancy.
Well, yeah, probably it is like that in some way, because also we need to remember that movies or films, they tend to exaggerate, certain points. But certainly there is this mystery around this centuries-old, process. At the same time, it is actually well choreographed or well managed. Because then there is a document that actually governs this whole period. Everyone knows, therefore, what to do. At the same time, especially for those newer cardinals, this is then the opportunity for them to familiarize themselves, with the whole procedures and obviously also to get to know, one another.
And there will be a lot of new cardinals, maybe perhaps some of them meeting for the first time now. Absolutely. And going into conclave because of the 108 or so that Francis has just appointed. Yes. Or well, has appointed over his papacy.
Others were just appointed last October.
Right.
And so the whole atmosphere and everything else that will be happening now will be new to them, you know.
Help us understand the link between the divinity of choosing a pope and the request from the Holy Spirit to lead deliberations, to be in the midst or to help cardinals forge a way forward, plus the human element of an election. How does that two marry?
For me, the key word is discernment. And discernment is exactly that. It is a marriage between the human and the divine. And certainly we have these human tendencies, and one might even call them, temptations. Yeah. For instance, to campaign for or against someone and such things. But then that's why that the atmosphere, they do as much as they can to make it a prayerful and spiritual atmosphere, so as to so that then actually it is the Holy Spirit then that will prevail in the end, and not that we go there perhaps as cardinals from Africa or Asia already we have a candidate in mind. So that's why they spend so much time in discussion, in reflection, in prayer, to prepare for the actual conclave.
So that's something very interesting that you mentioned, because a cardinal from a country on a continent is not necessarily going to vote for that person, or if there's a second cardinal on the continent. Talk to us about the discussions that normally happen, or to what extent are there discussions about who to choose?
I imagine that, of course, one of the things that is happening now as they meet in the so-called general congregations, that is all the cardinals, including the cardinal electors and those who are over the age of 80, they receive the reports about the state of the church, from the numbers to the financial situation and so forth. They receive reports about what is facing our world today, and therefore how should the church respond to these challenges and realities. And that then helps them to set, if you will, an agenda for the next pontificate. So that then it's not just that it's the views or the wishes of one individual, but they actually help, the next pope, let's say, so to say, to set the agenda. obviously, even though they those pointers and that agenda, quote unquote, it still, of course, depends also on the person's own personality. Because each pope, as we have seen over the last, whether you look at the last 5 popes, each one, put a stamp on the papacy, so there's still that each one brings their own flavor, depending also where they come from, their background, how they've been formed and raised up, and so forth. So
I did mention the Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio wasn't initially a favorite candidate on the list. We have a few candidates that the media have been portraying as top contenders. Control, if you could just put that up. But just elaborate on what makes them top contenders, so to speak, from a media point of view.
I don't know, honestly, but I think one of the things, or some of the terms that are being used, obviously, are the liberal or conservative, which I don't think those terms or labels are always helpful. Because, mind you, I might be perhaps more leaning towards one, or the other, but then the office actually changes you every time. Even though you bring your own views, personality to it, but you are also changed by it. So we can look at even the previous ones, perhaps how they were like, as someone has mentioned, for instance, with Cardinal Ratzinger.
Right.
He was known as a younger theologian and very progressive, but then later on as cardinal, perhaps, and he changed, and maybe also because of the task that he was given. But when he became pope, he was not the Ratzinger that we knew in some aspect. Lots of about him had changed, So we should also expect that, and not perhaps, box people, but also expect or be prepared to be surprised, so to speak.
Dr. Hadebe, something that I was surprised about is that there were at least 3 popes from Africa. From some of the reports I read, that Pope Gelasius I died more than 1,500 years ago. And this is according to this report. It's from Africa Proconsularis. That's the historic Roman province, which roughly encompasses Tunisia. Some saying 1,500 years ago, maybe it's about time we have another pope from Africa. What do you think?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And I also want to be in continuity with the bishop that really the issue of whether we need to have an African pope based sometimes on the numbers. There are more and more Catholics in African countries. I think sometimes it can detract in the sense that the position of the Pope needs to be somebody in continuity or even exceeding what Pope Francis has set in motion. And so even, for example, when we're talking about numbers, to say that there's more Africans who are Catholic, we need to ask ourselves, what is the consequence? Are these numbers just numbers without consequence? In other words, can we say, because the church in Africa is growing, Africa is rising to have less poverty, Africa is rising to have less GBV, Africa is rising, to be growing in prosperity, in equality, in inclusion. So so to get caught up in numbers, it's actually to lose the essence of what it is to hold a position of leadership, actually a position of service.
Right.
So my short answer, therefore, is to say that the priority at this particular moment is to say who is the ideal candidate, and also to say what is the impact of the Catholic Church in a continent that hosts the 10 poorest countries. DRC has most Catholics, but it's a country that has been in conflict. There's a lot of conflict going on. So what are we talking about when we say there's a growth in the church? Does it match the quality of life of people? And when we are searching for a leader, we want to start from the bottom to say, how will the day-to-day life of the ordinary person be further advanced?
Yeah, you mentioned something.
Very passionate about that.
You mentioned something about continuity. What does continuity mean for you?
I think for me as a woman, as you can see, it's an open secret that all the cardinals are men, so the women's voices are not even part of this conversation. So continuity is what Pope Francis has started to do to make the church more inclusive. So we have the process of synodality, which is his way of saying, let's do church from the bottom up. Let's ensure that the participation, that church is about participation of all its members. And all those members include women, they include the youth. And so when we look at the conclave and we see an absence of women and an absence of youth, then we're saying that we need a process, that we know that things take like centuries to change. But I think the whole idea of synodality is to begin to work from the foundation, where when you have the participation of all the members of the church, and then gradually, and even now, they are talking about the participation of all the members of the church in the election of bishops. So you're having a parallel process that we are hoping in a couple of centuries will find us in a place where even the conclave becomes a participatory process where the lay people are not given a leader that they don't know, but they are participating in bringing their voices to that process. So we've got two processes that are going on, and that I'm passionate about.
Father Smilo, taking into consideration what Dr. Hadebe said in terms of continuity, I wonder, in your mind, is there a natural successor then to Pope Francis?
Good evening to you and to the viewers. As Bishop said, there could be a surprise, but my point will be, especially about the statistics, that the church is growing in the southern hemisphere. And issues of the church in the southern hemisphere have to become part of the whole discussion. And we don't need an African pope to do that. Any pope can do that. But my point is continuity means inclusivity, as Dr. Nonthando was saying, but this inclusivity goes wider, even including priests, ordinary priests. I'm in a rural area, deep KwaZulu-Natal. And I also feel to a certain extent like Dr. Nonthando, my voice is not heard, the situations that I face. Just to give you an example, when there was a discussion about the family, the synod on the family, and then there was Maurice and Laetitia, and then they were talking about divorced people receiving communion. And Cardinal Wilfred Napier tweeted, at least I saw a tweet, back in 2017, and he was saying, what about the polygamies? Because in Africa, we don't have much of, well, it's growing now, divorced and remarried, but we also have polygamies. How people, because right now in the Catholic Church, only the first wife is allowed to receive communion. The husband is not, the second and the third wife is not allowed to receive communion. So my point is, issues of the Southern Hemisphere should be at the center, and I hope when the cardinals are meeting, we'll look at the statistics, not just the statistics, but look at the issues of the new world in a sense. What are issues that the church has met there, or challenges?
Should the church adapt, Bishop? Because some would argue the point of following the traditional aspect of the church and the morals and the doctrines of the church. But how does that kind of marry with the notion of, take for instance, Pope Francis? I think he was the first pope to have an Instagram account. Father Smilo is mentioning a tweet from one of the cardinals. To adapt in terms of technology, to adapt in terms of ideas in the modern world. Is there room for that? Is there a push for that?
Well, absolutely there is. Pope Paul VI was the first, I think, pope to ride a helicopter. So, and now you're talking about, the tweets and Instagram and so forth. Yes, the church has been adapting to, the modern era. Obviously, not at the pace that perhaps most of us would wish, but yes, it does, and it should. Let's say to remain relevant. Yeah. At the same time, it's of course, it's always a question so how far can the church go before then it becomes just like any other perhaps group in the society. Yeah. So I suppose it's always this to try and find the middle ground, so to speak. Yeah, a balance.
Dr. Hadebe, I mean, you mentioned in terms of the inclusivity, but you said it may take centuries. What makes you say that?
I know, when we think about that, we are now in the 21st century. I mean, it takes a long time to shift things, but that process is already starting now, as I said, with the synodality. So I may be a little bit pessimistic because things do seem to take time, but I think we need to keep on that spirit of ensuring and not just change for the sake of change, not just inclusion for the sake of inclusion, but a fundamental understanding that this world with its people are loved by God, and that the purpose of us being the church is to be, like what Pope Francis was talking, the hands and the feet of Christ, so that people experience God in their day-to-day life. Yeah. And even right now, even when we are talking about women's leadership, we just, the population of Namibia has just appointed a woman president. In Ghana, we have the first vice president who is a woman. We've got Tanzania, who's got a woman president. So when a church is operating in Africa in a context of evolving and inclusion in women in top leadership, it cannot ignore that reality. Yeah. We have the country with the highest representation of women parliamentarians in Rwanda. So the church operates in a wider context, so that we become part of the vision of the continent that we are in. So for me, that I think it's important in terms of being able to move with the, understand the times, and understand that there's a need to be able to, to be authentic to those times.
All right. We need to take a quick break. There's so much to discuss in terms of the next steps, the direction at which the church is heading to. Remember, conclave happens, there's no exact date at this stage, but we want to flesh it out and understand the process. So at the end of the day, when the person appears on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and says those words, we have a pope, there's an understanding of the direction. We're going to take a quick break. More next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. We're asking you the question basically around what should guide or what should the priorities be of the next pontiff, the next pope of the Catholic Church. Let us know at SABC News_TV. But we also went out to the streets of Johannesburg, various streets of Gauteng, to seek diverse insights and perspectives on this. And this is what you had to say. Take a look.
I think the next pope, should actually focus on how do we, as Catholics, emphasize our ideologies more on state politics and also on national and international political happenings here and there. But all in all, I also advocate for an African pope.
The next pope that's gonna get into that position, I just feel like he should include us as the youth more. We should actually, for us at this age, it's difficult for us to actually believe in God, do things godly.
Foster unity among different religions and everything. So that is what even in the scripture we call him our father. So he's father of all. So his primary function is to bring everybody together as one.
I think the next pope should focus on embracing diversity within the church. We need a greater representation of diverse voices, and he needs to tweak a bit of the traditions and align them to the modern times.
There is immorality in the church.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Before I go to digital audience, maybe you can respond there, Bishop, to the last point about the immorality within the church, possibly talking about the issues of the sex abuse issues. How is that being dealt in your view? How did Pope Francis deal with that?
Well, certainly the church is both human and divine, and so there will always be that. It's not just bad apples, but at times the system failed, those individuals who were, abused and therefore scarred for life. So there have been various attempts, to deal with this dark period in the life of the church. It started John Paul II, and then Benedict did more, and Francis by far has done more. Now every Episcopal conference, and not only that, but dioceses, religious congregations, they are required to have protocols in place. There is a commission on the safeguarding of children and minors. And so a lot has been done, but more needs to be done. It is never enough, because just one case of abuse is one case too much. So more needs to be done. But it's not only the Pope that has to do this. All of us, whether in our parishes, in our small communities, we all have to, be more, let's say, on the alert, but also do more to make all this environment, let's say, safe for everyone in the church.
And I have a book at home, and I was just reading it before the Pope passed away. It's called Pope Francis' Life, My Story Through History. And Francis talks about this, the abuse, saying that in part, and I just want to read it to you, what has happened to these innocent young people is truly satanic, and there's no justification. And the Pope cites cases, that have been uncovered in the United States, in South America, and Eastern Europe, Ireland, Malta, Spain, Germany, as well as Italy. And then he goes on to say, the church must fight this plague with all its strength. And I think the Pontifical Commission, which you've mentioned now, for the protection of minors that have been established in the Vatican, as well as in the offices created of various dioceses of the world, will be able to contribute and making a difference in the fight against these crimes, receiving the allegations, denouncing both abusers, whether religious or lay, and those who cover up abuse. So he was strong in terms of that. You would agree?
Yes, I would agree. Certainly, he also made mistakes. That also needs to be pointed out. And also, there were times when he recognized those mistakes and even apologized for them. And so, let me just say, it is an ongoing, fight, and we all need to, to be really part of it.
Let's go to a digital audience. Pick it up from there, Kustas.
Yes, good evening, Blaine. Thank you very much. I am very much encouraged. When I saw the funeral over the weekend, yesterday, it was an absolutely well-oiled machinery of a process, and it was very inclusive. So I'm of the view then that there must be a consensus about amongst the cardinals, that one, they need to look at somebody who will make sure that he continues with the unity and diversity of the church, but also a reassuring figure, who will not undo the past progress, but equally not push boundaries excessively. Now, I understand Dr. Hadebe, it changes fast, but remember, this is an institution of over 1,000 years old. And to change that, it will take time. You're dealing with liberals here. You're dealing with conservatives. So these changes are not going to happen very quickly because of the nature of how the church is set up. though it is global, it has to move with times.
Yeah.
So I'm suggesting that it must be a measuring figure. And of course, don't push excessively. Thank you.
Right. Christos, thank you for your contribution. Tina Bella, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Blaine. Good evening, all the guests. Yes, I saw that in one of the clips there was a sentence saying it is the end of an era. And I don't think it is the end of the era. I think actually, like you said, the question here is what priorities should help guide the next Pope's mission following the path charted by Pope Francis. I went to do some research and I saw a couple of things that he stood for and that he started and I think needs to be finished and globalized completely. Some of those things are, to mention just a few, abortion.
Yeah.
He didn't stand for abortion. It is a sin. Climate change. He talked about the migrant issues. That is very important in my eyes. Caring for the homeless, LGBTQ, and then he pointed those are priorities for him that he mentioned. Okay, so my point is I accept everything that he said. That was fantastic. I agree with everything except with the migrant issues. I have some issues with that. And my issues are this. He said that we must, and I can quote to you, we need to, he said, the refuge crisis in Mediterranean, there he was, and then migrants in the Americas and declining public empathy. I agree with that. But at some point in life, you need to start at home. So if you keep on having migrants coming into your country, and you cannot look after yourself, how are you ever going to look after them?
Right.
Jesus himself said you must look after your own home first. And charity begins at home, unfortunately.
Okay.
I don't say we don't have to have migrants, we don't.
Yeah.
But if they cannot conform to your rules and regulations and they keep on plundering your country,
right,
then I can't say that we must keep them.
One of the quotes that I saw from Pope Francis on migrants and refugees, he said that the Lord entrusts the church's motherly love every person forced to leave their homeland in search for a better future. In this regard, I wish to reaffirm that our shared response may be articulated by 4 verbs: to be welcome, to protect, to promote, and to integrate. Father Smilo, what Tina has said, how does that sit with you?
I think we need to remember that papacy is an institution of a church, and the church is primarily a community of faith. Whatever goodness that the church emits cannot come from mundane movements, but from faith in Jesus Christ. And one of the challenges that we have now is faith formation among Catholics. You know, they are not formed in faith. They are not much into the Gospels and so forth, because that's what sustains the whole thing, because that is the raise and the tread, that is what the church is about. And all these other things, which we call ministry of witness or ministry of charity or ministry of justice, must emanate, you know, the book of the prophets and all of that. So the Pope must be a man of faith first, must be a man united with God, united with Christ, as Christ-like as possible.
Yeah.
And we have the Gospels, we have the extra biblical books which tell about who Jesus was, but also we have spirituality, meditation, prayer. You know, one of the most impressive things for me, for Francis, was when we were sitting there during COVID in that massive St. Peter's Square praying. You know, as a priest myself, that's my primary duty. Yes, I serve people that, but it must emanate from faith. And if it's from faith, it's going to be sustainable. It will not be an end of an era, as Tina was saying.
Right. That's one of the things that many have described Pope Francis as a pastoral pope. Somebody was recalling an interaction with him and saying that, yes, you get the magnitude of the moment of being in front of a pope, but what it boils down to, and what Francis really was a priest. And that was very important and telling in terms of how he shaped communities from bottom upwards. JR, let's hear from you, your question.
Good evening, everybody. For me, I've loved the comments that were made by everybody on the panel. I must say that of all the popes, this one did have a few hiccups here and there, but then obviously there will always be different personalities that sit in that seat, and you'll never agree with everything 100%. So I'm not faulting him for that. In fact, I praise him for a lot of the good that he's done, because he's brought together a whole bunch of communities that might have never seen eye to eye previously. Right. So for that, I would commend him. I also think that, to what Father Mngadi was saying, that formation, first and foremost, helps you understand what the church is and its nature, therefore actually helping you make prudent decisions about the leadership that we choose and the type of leadership that we choose. And also remembering that we always have to get back to basics before we actually build on anything. And we have to understand the nature of laity and clergy and what both their duties are before we start saying, okay, we need to take over because we see the things on the ground. Why are we not communicating with our clergy to actually have our needs met? Another thing, just lightly, is the persecution of Christians. It's not a story that we cover, I think, enough, and we are the #1 persecuted religion across the board for any religion. And I think that is a huge issue that I haven't had many people address, and it's very concerning. That's it for me.
Bishop, is that something that the new Pope should address?
I would hope so. I would hope so that would be one of his priorities. I was fortunate to take part in the Synod and Synodality, the two sessions, 2023 and 2024. And around that Paul VI hall where we were gathered, we had people who came from, countries where there is a persecution of Christians. If you take, for instance, on our continent, certain parts of Nigeria, if you look at parts of India or Pakistan, and many other countries. So to listen to them as they shared their stories was really heartbreaking. So that's definitely one of the, that should be one of the priorities of the next Pope.
Dr. Hadebe, in terms of the priorities, I wonder how much has changed, though, since the days or since the Second Vatican Council, known as Vatican II. Pope John, not John Paul, Pope John the 23rd. He was a pope in 53, between 58 and 63. Reportedly wanted to bring the church up to date, so to speak. And these processes started under him, where you had the Second Vatican Council. What has changed since then? Has the church been brought closer to the people?
Thank you for that question. I think really Pope Francis took the Second Vatican Council, I think, a step further. When you think about the whole, for example, the definition of the church, according to the Second Vatican Council, is that it's a people of God. And they even had the constitution for the laity, encouraging, what Father Smilo is saying, the formation of the laity. And even now, when we look at the Synod and Pope Francis's commitment to saying that as a church, before we move forward, we don't move forward alone. We move forward and we take everybody with us. So the whole process of synodality, about listening to all voices, including the youth, LGBTI women, is actually a continuation and a fruition of the Second Vatican Council. And even when we talked about the inclusion of other faiths, we see Pope Francis deliberately coming out of the Catholic Church, engaging with people of other faith and being part of a global faith movement. And so we're seeing that happening. We're seeing Vatican II being taken one step further in the pontificate of Pope Francis, and particularly the role of the lay people, that we're no longer about just listening and not participating, but we are part of what is happening in the church, and the voices of all are being heard in this process of synodality. So I think that is really moving in that direction.
Father Smilo, saying you're a Christian is easy. Living the life tends to be more difficult. Turning the other cheek, not judging, forgiveness. To what extent did Pope Francis lead the way in us better understanding how to obtain that better, that goodness, so that we can learn as lay people how to be better?
Actually, right now I'm reading his autobiography, which is called Hope, the Autobiography, which he wrote himself, which was quite humble for a person of his magnitude to expose himself. And he exposes himself right from the beginning at home, how we grew up, how we acquired, firstly, basic human qualities, which I think is very important. We need to be human before we become Christian. There's an adage, I think it's from St. Augustine, which says, grace builds upon nature. So one needs, and he spoke these cliches, almost cliches, things like, you need to be able to say, please, thank you, I'm sorry. And he was quoting someone who was saying, before you talk, ask, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Those are all just human things. And I think if we go back to being human, incarnation, when Jesus Christ became human, he came to restore fallen humanity. So first we become human, and Christianity becomes kind of an embellishment of worship and so forth. Yes, Christianity calls for us to go beyond. If you read Philippians chapter 2 from verse 6 to 12, somewhere it says, though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. He humbled himself, taking a form of a servant, and even died the gruesome death of the cross. So there is that. First of all, we need to humble ourselves for the sake of others, not grasp to our privileges, our rights and whatever. And then we need to have some sacrifice to change the world. Yes, I can assure you, praying, it is difficult to be a Christian, but we try our best.
Thanks, Father. Tina, we've got a few seconds. You've got your hand up. Tina, can you hear us?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you. Okay. I thank all the leaders for their input here. It is humbling me. But what I just want to say one more thing about the migrants, for instance. Pope Francis, he walked a thin line between politics and religion. Okay. Now, we know some people say politics and religion don't match. I think he matched them perfectly. So what do you do with migrants when they enter your country? You allow them, yes, you do, because they are needy. You legalize them, yes, you do, if they can be legalized, if they want to be legalized, if the system allows it, first of all.
Right.
Then you teach them, you help them, you teach them. Then you do not you do not treat them differently to your own people. Okay, you don't give them privileges above your own people because you treat them as one of your own people. Right. That is what Jesus right. That's what he did. Then if they do not conform, then you have to send them home. Why do I say that? Because there's a saying, Dr. Leo de Pascalia said, the purpose in life is to help others. If you cannot help them, would you at least not hurt them?
Tina, we'll have to leave it there. Because we're fast running out of time, I just want to get the thoughts on what Tina has said, Bishop. And maybe you can just encompass this into your answer. The fact that the Pope is the head of state. The Vatican City is the smallest nation state in the world. People tend to forget that. So he kind of has to, draw that line between politics as well as being the spiritual leader of 1.4 billion people. How does he do that?
I imagine that must be the most difficult job in the world, certainly precisely because of that. At the same time, there's certain things that the gospel demands of us. And that's why, therefore, even though, yes, his position does carry some political influence and power, but really what drives the Pope ultimately as a pastor is the gospel. Yeah. And so Jesus did not compromise on certain things. you know. And Jesus, above all, showed us, you know, the face of a merciful Father. And this is what Pope Francis, you know, has done throughout his ministry. And I hope that also the next one will carry on, you know, with that,
Bishop Thulani, thank you so much for your time. We're fast running out of time. Dr. Hadebe, as well as Father Smilo Mngadi, appreciate your time. Tina, JR, and Kutstas, always value added. Thank you very much indeed for your questions. All right, before we go, here's my take. Francis' passing gives us an opportunity to reflect, to assess, reassess, to learn, putting purpose to the pain of loss, but also a hope for a better tomorrow. And there's a blessing in that. Why? Because he gave many a chance to understand that what is real and what the next step should be. He emphasized that God's unconditional love and mercy towards us, the need for forgiveness, a reassurance that the divine seeks us out regardless of our mistakes. So, how do we as a nation move forward from petty expediency to more profound love for one another? How do we use politics as an instrument for good? Iron sharpens iron, you heard that. Not to tear down, but to support and to understand as a community. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, then be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube, as well as SABC Plus. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.